Well, good evening, WNBA and LA Sparks fans, and welcome in to the LA Sparks 365 Network, your 24/7 365 comprehensive home of the WNBA and your two-time WNBA champion Los Angeles Sparks. Welcome in, folks, to WNBA 365 Playoff Central for Monday, August 25th, 2014. Cal McClure joining you folks here from Studio 171 in San Diego, and that man on my desk via Apple's FaceTime from the 800 Studios up in Anaheim, California, like normal, is Chris Romancy of the 800 Studios up in Anaheim, California. Chris, good evening, and how's it going?
Just shaking my head because this Google Hangout and just this Angel game, they're about to find out what happens, and just getting happy because tomorrow finally probably back to a job.
Folks, we still are still marred and still in shambles right now with technical difficulties. So for night two, we have to go back to the microphone in hand, and then of course, say hi, Chris. Chris is on FaceTime right here, folks. That's why we're getting his audio as well. We're getting his audio from there. Chris, we know that of course with the Sparks season coming to an end last night with that 93-68 loss last night. Chris, Candace Parker and Nneka Ogwumike had a very somber, depressing, and very disappointing press conference after Game 2 last night that I did play for both of us during our FaceTime session before we came on the air. And, Chris, you can really tell that Nneka and Candace were very disappointed with the effort of the team all season. Candace Parker made a lot of great points about the team that was, an up-and-down season that was marred by off-season rumors of the team folding or staying or leaving for the Bay Area. And I think Candace, Chris, hit a plenty of nails on the head and really, Chris spoke her mind and was a bit critical about the franchise. Nneka even said, Chris, that this was the first time that she's been on a team where they had performed so bad where they were below 500 in her whole career so far. So, Chris, I know that you probably caught bits and pieces of the press conference, but what you caught out of it, what was your thoughts, though, about hearing Candace and Nneka's post-game remarks following that big blowout loss to the Mercury last night at Staples Center?
Just they've been stressful and sad what they've gone through this season. Below 500, up and down the season, didn't even get back to 500 then the season, and just then had it in Game 1 of the playoffs, but then in Game 2 came back home and just they didn't even give it all their best.
Chris, Candace and Nneka seemed like they were very, very down on the dumps. It wasn't to the point where it was like where we saw with Candace, sprawled out on the floor in Game 1, or what we saw the past two seasons in 12 and 13. But in a roundabout way, Chris, Candace, specifically, Chris, feels like they failed the city of Los Angeles because we knew, Chris, when Magic came in, they would have, the hype and the publicity, of this team, they're going to be the number one seed. They might, set more records. Is this year they finally win the WNBA title? And, Chris, I think, that specifically that, hearing Candace's remarks after the game, Chris, she felt like this team this year failed miserably, and they really, Chris, failed the entire city and the fans for not following up on, the promises of the championships for the season. And Chris, in a roundabout way, both Candace and Nneka felt like that they failed the city of LA, Chris, and we know that all the teams in LA, Chris, the Dodgers, the Lakers, the Galaxy, the Kings even now, Chris, they're all held to that higher standard, sort of, Chris, sort of like New York pro teams are, where they're all held to a higher standard that, you have to win the championship or we're going to hate your guts till next season, Chris. Do you at all think, though, that seeing and hearing that press conference that they both felt like that they basically failed the entire city of LA and this beloved and this dedicated franchise's fan base once again in the postseason?
Yeah, I think so. Since knowing Matt Johnson bought the team and the hype, Los Angeles with a lot of championships with the Lakers, the Galaxy, and now with the Kings with 2 championships. Just let the city of LA down.
Yeah, Chris, I think Candace and NECA both felt like they let down the city of LA, Chris, and really, Chris, this was, a completely different Candace Parker and a completely different NECA Ogumake post game yesterday. Folks, if you've not seen the press conference, we'll send you folks the link to the presser following the first show here. But Chris, I think that as we know of again, that there was a lot of anticipation, a lot of factors playing into the Sparks season this year. And in a roundabout way, Chris, we know that they felt like that they failed the city of Los Angeles, Chris, and the fan base. But in a roundabout way, though, Chris, that Candace and NECA hit nails on the head that the team really wasn't gelling for the first part of the season. Candace had a lot of great points about the team's play during the season with their rebounding issues, and they never found their true identity during the season if they were going to be a team that would go inside, take jumpers or shoot the three ball or whatever they have you. They didn't have an identity set forward. But Chris, the thing that Candace brought up though that was a true fact, Chris, was the locker room atmosphere. No one gave up. No one, that locker room, Chris, had that bend but not break mentality. And Candace even said, Chris, this was one of the best locker rooms she was ever a part of, going back to college and high school. That in a season, Chris, that is marred, that has been and will be marred forever by the off-season rumors and then the hype and the all the Hollywood stuff, Chris. About Magic buying the team, and everything else included. Man, that they felt like that they failed, Chris. But again, that Candace said though that the locker room didn't bend or break like most teams would have crumpled under that pressure, Chris. How do you think, Chris, that the Sparks handled the LA/Hollywood fame pressure this year with Magic as their owner for the first year?
I think they did kind of not good. Just went a lot of pressure. Just what they gone through the off season went up and down. Trying to do really good to impress Adam Johnson, and just look like they didn't have it this season.
Chris, I think this goes back to my first point I made back in May when we came on the day after the home opener this year. And I think, Chris, that this is a talking point all season that the Sparks really played a different brand of basketball. They looked like, Chris, that they were very nerve-wracked. They were very, very shell-shocked. Chris, and very uptight, and looked like, Chris, you could tell, Chris, that this team was playing under a lot of stress, a lot of mental problems, it seemed like, Chris, but more so, a lot of pressure, again, having to play, with Magic Johnson sitting courtside at a few games this year. And Chris, specifically, Chris, the home opener, that was a completely different LA Sparks basketball team that we saw Game 1 in Seattle when they came home and they had Magic there, Chris. I think they were doing way too much with way too little all season. I think that they had, Magic, Chris, and all the celebrities were coming out like Matt Kemp on Sunday. The actors and the comedians, Chris, and Magic being there, Rick Fox, Kel Mitchell, to name a few. But Chris, do you believe though that more so that this season, Chris, we remember that the Sparks really playing a very, very, we're basically, Chris, playing under pressure all season, basically?
Yeah, pretty much they were.
So again, folks, we'll have more about the Sparks, of course, during the entire playoff and off-season campaign here on the network, of course. We will bring more to you folks about that when the time comes. So, Chris, with that, we'll get to the remaining 4 teams that are left right now, or the 5 teams, I should say, that are remaining here in the WNBA postseason. Again, with the Dream winning yesterday, 92-83 over Chicago. We have Game 3 tomorrow back in Atlanta, 4:30 game time on NBA TV. Chris, Chicago laid a massive egg yesterday. Again, a hot start, but what looked like it was basically Phoenix, LA Part 2, basically, where they got to a big lead and couldn't hold the lead, and Angel McCoughtry went off for 39 points, Chris. What was your turning point, though, in Game 2, seeing Atlanta getting down by a lot, Chris, rallying back, and basically, slamming the door shut on Chicago's hopes of a series sweep?
Wait, what?
What was your thoughts about seeing Atlanta come back after, basically losing at the buzzer in Game 1 to basically slamming the door shut on any hopes of a Chicago Sky sweep in Game 2 back in Rosemont?
I think they just don't want to get swept against a 4-seeded Chicago Sky, and they just slammed the door against Chicago Sky. and they can force Game 3 back at home.
Again, folks, Chicago-Atlanta Game 3 winner faces the number 2 seed Indiana Fever on Saturday back over, which will be over at Bankers Life Fieldhouse in Indianapolis, Indiana. Game 3 tomorrow again at 4:30 pack time on NBA TV. So, Chris, with the Mercury making very quick work of the LA Sparks last night, that brings us to, for the, I believe, Chris, the 4th time in 5 years or 5th time in 6 years, we will have the Mercury and Lynx in the WNBA Western Conference Finals. This is like the 4th or 5th time, I think, in the past 6 seasons we have a Minnesota-Phoenix matchup here. Now, the schedule goes as follows here. Game 1 will be on Friday night at 7 o'clock from U.S. Airways Center in Phoenix, Arizona on NBA TV. Then on Sunday at 12:30 Pacific Time, Phoenix at Minnesota on ABC from the Target Center in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Chris, okay, we just saw the Mercury basically garbage truck and run over the Sparks last night. And the Lynx, Chris, I think, Chris, the Lynx were actually hoping for a Sparks win. So it would go to Game 3, and that team would be very weak and very tired and fatigued going into Game 1 on Friday. But, Chris, now that we have this matchup set, who are you favoring here? Are you favoring the number 1 seed Mercury, who've had a great season that might wind up with them hoisting the championship, Chris? Or are you the betting man here going with the defending champion Minnesota Lynx?
I think I'm going with probably going to be a great series. Probably go to like very down in the wire in all 3 games. I think I'll probably go to like all 3 games down in the wire, and I think Minnesota Lynx will probably going back to the WNBA finals.
Chris, I think there's one problem, I think, with everyone's theory that if Minnesota wins, that, that, again, the Lynx are in the postseason or in the finals. And, Chris, that's a thing that the WNBA cannot afford to have, is having the same 2 teams every year always in the finals, because that's going to really deteriorate away from people watching every year if they know, Chris, basically know who's going to win the title every season. If it's going to be Minnesota, Atlanta every season, which it's been for the past 2 seasons. It's going to be another classic series between these 2 franchises who have been the cream of the crop in the Western Conference for the past few seasons, getting back to last season and even in 2012. But Chris, I don't know if anyone can stop Phoenix, nor am I saying that there's no chance of the Lynx winning the series. It's going to go 3, but if I have to pick, it's so tough. To go between 2 of my favorite players in Diana Taurasi and Maya Moore, the reigning MVP. But, Chris, I think the Mercury are on a mission this year. I think with their regular season, the record shattering that they had the regular season with those 29 wins, their 16-game winning streak, Chris, I think that they're coming in too hot. But at the same time, this is not the same Lynx team, Chris, of the past years where they had so many injury problems during the season. This year with Rebecca Brunson missing time, Simone Augustus missing time, but they were luckily kept afloat by the MVP, Maya Moore, this season. It's going to go 3. I think it's going to go 3, Chris, but I think that the Mercury pull out the 2 out of 3 games because I think that, Chris, the reason why I say Phoenix, Chris, that home record is unbelievably out of this world that they have lost 1 game all season at home at U.S. Airways Center. And I believe Chris, I believe, though, that between Target and U.S. Airways, Chris, those are the 2 toughest buildings to win in the WNBA. And I think that X Factor is going to be in full force, Chris, which I believe it's going to be at both arenas, Chris. But I think that with the Mercury's all-around team, I think that this year, Chris, Phoenix, I think this year is a bit better than the Lynx. It's not a knock on the Lynx, Chris, but I think that with the Mercury not having really any injury problems, where the Lynx had a combined total of about 40 games missed between Rebecca Brunson's injury and Augustus's injury, Chris. And I think that the Lynx are more so in it for respect, that they've not been given a whole lot, which I think that's very unfair to not give the defending champs a shake. Chris, I'm giving them Game 3. I'm giving them Game 2 in Minnesota because I do not think that they can win at U.S. Airways Center this year. But Chris, it'll be another classic series. But me personally, I think it's going to be Phoenix going all the way to the WNBA Finals. What do you think?
don't know now because I figured I don't even know.
I mean, there's a lot going on, Chris, with the series coming because this is like we said, Chris, like the fourth or fifth time in 6 years Phoenix faces Minnesota with a chance to go to the WNBA Finals. The 1 and 2 seeds in the WNBA Western Conference. Two teams that really have no respect, that really have a lot of respect for each other and everyone else included, Chris. But honestly, I really don't know if Minnesota can hang because I think that the Mercury, Chris, have basically owned Minnesota all season. So I think that's why I think that I favor Phoenix in that series. Other than that, Chris, not much else to get to here for tonight. We know that there's been a lot going on, Chris. We'll get to one thing, Chris, that we did not get a chance to talk about on the show a few nights ago when the Lynx did eliminate the San Antonio Stars, Chris. That was the final walk off the court, Chris, for one Becky Hammon, who saw her last game end at AT&T Center. She also, Chris, won the 2014 Kim Peretz Sportsmanship Award for the season. Chris, very tough to see Becky's career end in a sweep at her home arena in San Antonio. But Chris, I think the reason why that we all love Becky so much is of the knockdown comeback story that she had during the season, or during her whole career, Chris, how she was undrafted out of Colorado State, Chris, who's not really a big women's basketball juggernaut. She was undrafted and then went and signed with New York, Chris, in 1999, had a tremendous season or career with them. 6-time All-Star. She became the fan favorite at MSG and a valued member of the WNBA for her leadership on and off the court. And then, of course, was named to the All-WNBA Top 15 team back in 2011, which was the top 15 players dating back to 1997. It's a legacy, Chris, that's going to live on forever in San Antonio, and it's just going to be, Chris, really, really painful to not see her play next season with the Stars. But Chris, again, she's basically taking over Candace Parker's role of being the person that's an inspiration for women, Chris, that now she can prove that you can coach in a male-dominated sport, Chris, like she's going to be in the NBA this upcoming season with the defending NBA champion Spurs, Chris. Your lasting thoughts on what was a tremendous season and career, Chris, for one Becky Hammon?
Just a great career for Becky Hammon, and she really missed in the WNBA, and just now she does great in the NBA.
Chris, the final totals here for the Kim Peretz Sportsmanship Award. Becky blew out the field by a margin of 20 points, Chris. She had 20 more points over Maya Moore, who finished 2, followed up by Brianne January, Penny Taylor at 2, Camille Little, Courtney Vandersloot, Kelsey Griffin, Kia Vaughn, and Tina Charles all had 1 vote in the season, or for the award this season. And Chris, Kim Peretz's legacy also lives on as much as it will for Becky Hammon, Chris. How Kim Peretz's career came to a screeching halt after 2 seasons with the Houston Comets from 97 to 98. She was diagnosed and died from lung cancer after a 7-month battle in August of 1999, Chris. And one of the top 10 moments, Chris, by the way, folks, you guys can go on to ESPNW.com, and you can rank your top 10 WNBA playoff memories all time from the WNBA finals or playoffs from the past 18 years on ESPNW.com. And Chris, one of them I think that is probably going to win is what the Comets called number 3 for number 10, Chris, which was the first year or the same season when Kim Peretz passed on, and they did win their 3rd straight WNBA title in 1999, Chris, and how it was so emotional and how they were so emotionally spent at the Compaq Center, which is now demolished, unfortunately, down in Houston, with the confetti and the tears flowing and the hugs and looking up to Kim Peretz's retired jersey number at the center, Chris. That it's probably the most influential player as well, Chris. That you can play your sports, Chris, and then be diagnosed with one, but you keep fighting until you finally say no, enough is enough, Chris. And with that, Chris, Becky Hammon will be receiving a $5,000 design trophy from the Tiffany & Company, plus a $5,000 donation to her charity of choice. So, Chris, Chris, A great player that leaves a true legacy on the court, Chris. Wins an award for a person that had a great legacy on the court before cancer took her life.
Yep.
So again, folks, a final curtain call here for one Becky Hammon. We will miss you very much in the WNBA in the 2015 season, and best of luck, Coach Hammon, with the San Antonio Spurs. Now, Chris, a couple more things here real quick here, Chris, before we go on to one of our news shows debuting coming up here again, Chris, is again the Seattle Storm, Chris, won the WNBA draft lottery back last week with a 12-22 record. They got the number one pick, Chris. Again, the top 4 selections, again, will be Seattle at 1, Tulsa 2, Connecticut 3, and then Connecticut via the Liberty at 4. Now, folks, Chris, actually, here's the official WNBA draft lottery or draft order for the 2015 season. Seattle at 1, Tulsa 2, Connecticut at 3, Connecticut via New York at 4. Rounding out the last half, Chris, Chicago at 5, Indiana at 6, Los Angeles at 7, Washington at 8, San Antonio at 9, Atlanta at 10, Minnesota 11, and Phoenix at 12. So there is the 2015 WNBA draft order for the upcoming season. Now again, folks, coming up next year at 10:30 will be FIBA 365, folks, the 2014 through 2016 USA women's basketball team training camp roster has been officially announced. So we will have that for you folks coming up in our next show. And Chris, this is the main reason this year, Chris, as to why the WNBA season was cut so short this year, as far as the regular season being compacted into basically, Chris, 3 months because of this tournament happening in late August or early September, or late September, I should say, in Istanbul, Turkey, Chris. This is basically the FIBA World Cup of basketball, but also, Chris, it's a tune-up as well for the 2016 Olympic Games. So again, folks, FIBA 365 is coming up next year on the LA Sparks 365 network. Now, Chris, before we close out of here for this first show, your lasting thoughts on what we heard about from Candace Parker and Nneka Ogwumike's press conference. And again, Chris, going back to that question, but again, Chris, do you really feel, though, that Candace and Nneka really felt like that they did let down the city of LA as well? Your lasting thoughts about the press conference that we saw and heard earlier this evening.
Yeah, I just think both Candace and Nneka let the city of Los Angeles down, not performing up to their high standards with Matt Johnson, with the owner, and just let the city of LA down.
Chris, I think this will be a talking point on tomorrow night and even on Thursday. Is again, Chris, that it just seems like that press conference, Chris, was Chris, it was a very somber mood between Candace and Nneka. The reporters, Chris, were even very, very down on the dumps too. It seemed like too. They weren't even. They were very, very, very low key on their questions. Very in a very low tone of voice as well. Because Chris, you can tell that Candace and Nneka were very, very disappointed, Chris, with their effort all season. And again, Chris, with Candace Parker again, who will basically, Chris, be in control of this LA team next season, thanks a lot to Magic Johnson putting her in control for next season, Chris. Again, man, before we move out of here again, is what do you think, though, what do you think will happen with LA next season as far as it goes with roster moves, front office personnel? What do you think is going to happen next year, dude?
I think they're probably going to make a big explosive trade or something with a big player. All-star, I don't know who, coming to LA. Just we'll see in the offseason.
We will wait and see what happens, folks. But again, we will have Game 3 tomorrow, folks, between the Atlanta Dream and Chicago Sky. 4:30 p.m. NBA TV from the Phillips Arena in Atlanta, GA. All right, folks, we'll take a break here. When we come back, we get ready to talk international basketball for the first time on the network here, folks. FIBA 365 is coming up next year to talk about and discuss the 2014 through 2016 USA Women's Basketball National Team roster and training camp invites, and a look at the 2014 FIBA World Cup of Basketball playoff and tournament brackets coming up next year on the LA Sparks 365 network. So, folks, please do not go away, whatever you do.